My daughter-in-law slept with my husband a week before we signed the divorce papers. I pretended to know nothing. At the meeting, the lawyer handed me a document denying my rights. I smiled. What I did next left everyone in shock. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of my dining room as I set out the good china for lunch. Sage had called that morning, her voice unusually tight when she asked if we could talk, just the two of us. Something about her tone made my stomach clench, but I pushed the feeling aside. Sage was my daughter-in-law Ember's older sister, and while we'd always been cordial, we weren't particularly close. I smoothed my hands over the tablecloth, the same cream-colored linen I'd used for family gatherings for 30 years. At 64, I still took pride in maintaining traditions, in creating a welcoming home. The house felt too quiet with just me rattling around in it lately. Damon, my husband of 42 years, had been distant for months, always finding excuses to work late or disappear into his study. And Wade, our 35-year-old son, was so wrapped up in his marriage to Ember that his visits had become perfunctory at best. The doorbell chimed, and I opened it to find Sage standing on my front steps, clutching her purse like a shield. She looked pale, her usually perfect makeup slightly smudged around her eyes as if she'd been crying. "Nadine, thank you for seeing me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course, dear. Come in, come in." I led her to the dining room, noting how her hands trembled slightly as she set down her purse. "I made your favorite cucumber sandwiches, and that lemon cake you complimented last Easter." She managed a weak smile but didn't touch the food I'd carefully arranged. Instead, she stared at her folded hands, her knuckles white with tension. "Sage, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." She looked up then, and I saw something in her green eyes that made my blood run cold. Pain, guilt, and underneath it all, a desperate kind of love. "Nadine, I need to tell you something, and I don't know how to say it without destroying everything." My heart began to pound, but I kept my voice steady. "Whatever it is, we can work through it together." Sage let out a shaky breath, tears pooling in her eyes. "It's about Ember and Damon." The world tilted slightly, but I forced myself to remain still, my hands folded calmly in my lap. "What about them? They're having an affair." The words tumbled out in a rush, as if she'd been holding them back for so long they'd built up pressure. "I've known for weeks. I saw them together at that little cafe downtown, the one near Damon's office. They were holding hands, kissing, acting like lovers." I felt something inside me crack, like ice breaking on a frozen pond, but my voice remained steady. "Are you certain?" Sage nodded miserably. "I confronted Ember about it. She didn't even try to deny it. She just laughed and said it wasn't any of my business. But Nadine, the things she said about you..." Her voice broke completely then. "What things?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "She said you were old and boring, that Damon deserved better. She said once the divorce was final, she'd make sure you got as little as possible. She's been planning this, Nadine, the whole thing. She married Wade to get close to the family, to the money. She's been working on Damon for months." The room spun around me, but I gripped the edge of the table and held on. 42 years of marriage, a son I'd raised with love and dedication, a daughter-in-law I'd welcomed with open arms, all of it crumbling because of greed and betrayal. "Why are you telling me this?" I whispered. Sage reached across the table and grasped my hand. "Because it's wrong. Because you've been nothing but kind to our family, and you don't deserve this. Because Wade doesn't deserve to be married to someone who's capable of this level of deception." She paused, wiping her eyes with her free hand. "And because I love my nephew, and I can't stand watching Ember destroy everything good in this family." I stared at our joined hands, mine wrinkled and spotted with age, hers smooth and young. "Does Wade know?" "No, and I don't know if I should tell him. It would destroy him." I pulled my hand free and stood up slowly, walking to the window that overlooked the garden Damon and I had planted together in our early years. The roses were in full bloom, their red petals bright against the green foliage. Everything looked so normal, so peaceful, but underneath, the roots were rotting. "What will you do?" Sage asked behind me. I turned back to her, and something had shifted inside me. The initial shock was giving way to something cooler, more calculating. I'd spent my entire adult life taking care of others, smoothing over problems, keeping the peace. But this wasn't something that could be smoothed over. Nothing, I said calmly. Sage's eyes widened. Nothing? I'm going to pretend I never heard this conversation. I'm going to smile and play the devoted wife and mother, and I'm going to let them think they're winning. But Nadine, Sage dear, some games require patience, and I've been patient for a very long time. I sat back down and poured myself a cup of tea with steady hands. Tell me, does Ember know you're here? No, she thinks I'm at work. Good. It needs to stay that way. I met her eyes, and she must have seen something there that surprised her because she sat back slightly. Can you do that for me? Can you pretend you never told me? Sage nodded slowly. But what about Wade? What about your marriage? I took a sip of tea, letting the familiar ritual calm my racing thoughts. Some battles aren't won by charging in with guns blazing, dear. Sometimes you have to let your enemies think they've already won. After Sage left, I sat alone in my dining room for a long time, staring at the untouched cake and sandwiches. The house felt different now, as if the very walls had shifted. Every family photo on the mantel, every shared memory attached to the furniture and decorations, all of it tainted by the knowledge of what was happening under my own roof. When Damon came home that evening, I was in the kitchen preparing his favorite dinner, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, the same meal I'd made every Thursday for 40 years. Smells good, he said, not meeting my eyes as he loosened his tie. Long day at the office? I asked pleasantly, as if I didn't know he'd probably spent his lunch hour with my daughter-in-law. The usual. He disappeared upstairs to change, and I continued setting the table, my movements automatic and precise. When he returned, we ate in relative silence, the conversation limited to mundane topics about the weather and household repairs. But I watched him carefully now, noting things I'd overlooked before. The way he checked his phone constantly, the new cologne he'd started wearing, the fact that he no longer looked at me when he spoke. 42 years, and I was just now seeing my husband clearly. That night, as he lay beside me in our king-sized bed, I stared at the ceiling and made a decision. They wanted to play games? Fine. But they had no idea who they were playing against. Living with the knowledge of betrayal was like walking on broken glass. Every smile I forced, every pleasant conversation I maintained, cut deeper into my soul. But I persisted, playing my role as the unsuspecting wife and mother while carefully observing the elaborate deception unfolding in my own home. 3 days after Sage's revelation, Ember arrived for our usual Sunday dinner. She swept into my kitchen wearing a new designer dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her smile bright and false as costume jewelry. "Nadine, you look wonderful," she gushed, embracing me with theatrical warmth. "I love what you've done with the flowers on the table." I returned her hug, noting the expensive perfume that clung to her skin, the same scent I'd detected on Damon's shirts lately. "Thank you, dear. Wade should be here shortly. Would you like some wine while we wait?" "That would be lovely." She settled herself at the kitchen island, crossing her legs elegantly. "Actually, I was hoping we could have a little chat, just us girls." My hands remained steady as I poured the wine, though my heart began to race. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Ember took a delicate sip and leaned forward conspiratorially. "I'm worried about you, Nadine. About you and Damon." The audacity of it nearly took my breath away. Here she was, the architect of my marriage's destruction, pretending to be concerned. "Oh? Why would you be worried?" "Well, you two seem so distant lately. At family gatherings, there's this tension." She placed her manicured hand over mine in a gesture of false sympathy. "Marriage can be so challenging after so many years. The spark just fades sometimes." I nodded thoughtfully, as if considering her words. "You know, you might be right. We have been going through a rough patch." Ember's eyes lit up with satisfaction that she tried to disguise as concern. "Have you considered counseling? Or maybe it's time to think about what would make you both happier in the long run." "You think we should divorce?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "I'm not saying that." She backtracked quickly, but I could see the excitement beneath her concerned facade. "I just think life is too short to stay in a marriage that isn't fulfilling. You deserve to be happy, Nadine. You deserve someone who appreciates you." The irony was suffocating. "That's very thoughtful of you to say." "I care about this family," she continued, her voice taking on a practiced sincerity. "Wade would want both his parents to be happy, even if that means apart. And honestly, you're still such an attractive woman. I'm sure there are plenty of men who would be thrilled to have someone like you." I smiled and nodded, playing the role of the naive older woman being gently guided toward divorce by her caring daughter-in-law. Inside, I was cataloging every word, every gesture, every calculated manipulation. When Wade arrived, the dynamic shifted immediately. Ember transformed into the devoted wife, hanging on his every word, touching his arm constantly, laughing at his jokes with exaggerated delight. But I noticed how her eyes would drift to the doorway whenever Damon's car pulled into the driveway. Damon entered the dining room 20 minutes late, claiming he'd been detained at the office. Ember's cheeks flushed pink when he kissed my cheek in greeting, and I watched as their eyes met for just a moment too long across the table. "Sorry I'm late," Damon said, taking his usual seat. "Crisis at the Matthews account." "No problem at all," Wade replied. "We were just talking about the vacation Ember and I are planning for next month." "Oh, that's right," Damon said, his attention suddenly focused. "Where are you thinking of going?" "We haven't decided yet," Ember said, her voice breathier than usual. "Maybe somewhere warm, tropical, a place where we can just escape from everything." The way she looked at Damon when she said escape made my stomach turn, but I continued cutting my roast beef with steady hands, maintaining my pleasant expression. "That sounds wonderful," I said. "You young people work so hard. You deserve a break." After dinner, while Wade and I cleared the dishes, Ember and Damon remained at the table, their conversation low and intimate. I strained to catch fragments of their words. "Can't keep doing this." Ember's voice, urgent and pleading. "Not much longer." Damon's reply, reassuring. "She suspects something." Ember again, worried. "She doesn't know anything." Damon, dismissive. "They were wrong. I knew everything." But I continued loading the dishwasher, humming softly to myself as if I didn't have a care in the world. The following week, I made an appointment with my lawyer. Not the family attorney Damon and I had used for years, but a sharp woman named Patricia Chen who specialized in complex divorce cases. Her office was downtown, far from our usual haunts, ensuring I wouldn't be seen by anyone who might report back to Damon. Patricia was younger than me, probably in her 40s, with intelligent dark eyes and an air of competence that immediately put me at ease. "Mrs. Morrison," she said after I'd explained my situation, "I have to ask why you haven't confronted your husband directly about the affair." I clasped my hands in my lap, choosing my words carefully, "because I want to understand exactly what I'm dealing with before I make any decisions. This house, our assets, our family legacy, I need to know where I stand legally." Patricia nodded approvingly. "Smart approach. Let's start with the basics. How are your assets currently titled?" For the next hour, we went through everything. The house, purchased 40 years ago with money from my family's estate. The investment accounts, accumulated over decades of careful saving. The family business that Damon had inherited from his father. Most importantly, the trust that had been established by my grandfather, which included the house and several other properties. "This is interesting," Patricia said, studying the trust documents I'd brought. "Your grandfather was quite forward-thinking. This trust has some very specific provisions about inheritance and divorce." "What kind of provisions?" "Well, the house can never be sold or transferred to anyone outside your direct bloodline. Even if you divorce, your husband would have no claim to it. And there's a clause here about infidelity that's quite unusual for trusts established in that era." My pulse quickened. "What does it say?" Patricia read from the document. "In the event that a marriage is dissolved due to adultery, the innocent party retains all rights to trust properties, and the offending party forfeits any claim to assets derived from or connected to said trust." I sat back in my chair, feeling something like hope stir in my chest for the first time in weeks. "So if I can prove Damon's affair, you would retain not just the house, but several other properties and investments that are connected to the trust. Properties that your husband currently believes he has a stake in, and he doesn't know about these provisions?" Patricia shook her head. "From what you've told me, it sounds like he's operating under the assumption that you'd be entitled to half of everything in a standard divorce proceeding. He has no idea about the trust's protections." I left Patricia's office feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Damon and Ember thought they were playing chess, but they didn't even know all the pieces on the board. That evening, I watched as Damon struggled to maintain his facade of the devoted husband. He complimented my cooking with forced enthusiasm, asked about my day with manufactured interest, and kissed my forehead goodnight with lips that had been kissing another woman. But I could see the cracks in his performance. The guilt was eating at him, even as his arrogance convinced him he was getting away with it. "Damon," I said as we prepared for bed, "I've been thinking about what Ember said the other day, about our marriage." He stiffened, his back to me as he hung up his shirt. "What about it?" "Maybe she's right. Maybe we should consider our options." He turned then, and I saw a flash of something in his eyes. Relief? Excitement? "Are you saying you want a divorce?" I shrugged, as if the thought didn't break my heart. "I'm saying maybe it's time we both pursued our happiness, wherever that might lead." Damon nodded slowly, trying to look solemn while clearly fighting back a smile. "If that's what you want, Nadine, I just want you to be happy, liar." But I smiled back at him, playing my part in this terrible theater. "I want us both to be happy." As I lay in bed that night, listening to Damon's satisfied breathing beside me, I thought about Ember's triumphant smile, about the expensive dress and perfume she wore to family dinners now, about the way she touched my son's shoulder while planning her escape with his father. They thought they were so clever. They thought they'd already won. They had no idea the game was just beginning. The law offices of Pemberton and Associates occupied the top floor of a gleaming downtown high-rise, all marble and mahogany designed to intimidate. I sat in the reception area, my hands folded calmly in my lap while Damon paced near the floor-to-ceiling windows, checking his phone every few seconds. He'd been on edge all morning, snapping at me over breakfast and muttering under his breath about getting this over with. Ember had insisted on coming, claiming she wanted to support Wade during this difficult time for the family. She sat beside my son now, her hand resting possessively on his thigh while she whispered reassurances in his ear. Wade looked devastated, his face pale and drawn. He still believed this divorce was a mutual decision, a sad but amicable end to a marriage that had simply run its course, if only he knew the truth. "Mrs. Morrison? Mr. Morrison?" A tall, silver-haired man in an expensive suit approached us. "I'm Richard Pemberton. Thank you for coming in today." Damon had chosen Pemberton himself, claiming the man was the best divorce attorney in the city. What Damon didn't mention was that Pemberton was also a longtime friend of his from their country club, a detail I'd discovered during my own research into the man's background. We were led into a conference room dominated by a massive table surrounded by leather chairs. Pemberton took his seat at the head, spreading documents across the polished surface with practiced efficiency. Damon sat to his right, while I took the chair directly across from them. Wade and Ember positioned themselves at the far end of the table, close enough to observe but removed from the main proceedings. "Before we begin," Pemberton said, his voice carrying the smooth authority of someone accustomed to controlling rooms full of people, "I want to ensure everyone understands that this is intended to be an amicable dissolution. Both parties have expressed a desire to handle this matter with dignity and fairness." I nodded graciously. "Of course. That's what we both want." Damon shot me a quick glance, probably surprised by my cooperative tone. He'd been expecting resistance, arguments, tears. Instead, I'd been nothing but reasonable since agreeing to the divorce, which had clearly unsettled him. "Excellent," Pemberton continued. "Now, let's review the proposed settlement." He slid a thick folder across the table to me. "As you'll see, we've attempted to divide the marital assets equitably, taking into consideration the length of the marriage and both parties' contributions." I opened the folder and began reading, my expression neutral even as the words on the page made my blood boil. According to Pemberton's proposal, I would receive the small downtown condo we'd purchased as an investment property 15 years ago, along with half of our joint savings account and a modest monthly alimony payment. Damon would retain the family home, the business, the vacation properties, and the majority of our investment portfolio. "This seems rather one-sided," I said mildly, not looking up from the documents. Pemberton cleared his throat. "I understand your concern, Mrs. Morrison, but we have to consider the reality of the situation. Your husband has been the primary breadwinner throughout the marriage, and the business requires continuity of leadership. The house has significant maintenance costs that would be difficult for you to manage on a reduced income." Translation: they thought I was too old, too dependent, too too naive to fight for what was rightfully mine. Additionally, Pemberton continued, his tone becoming more condescending, there are some complications regarding the house specifically. It appears there may be some irregularities with the original deed and trust documentation. Until those issues are resolved, it would be prudent to leave the property in Mr. Morrison's name to avoid any legal complications. I almost laughed at the sheer audacity of it. They were trying to steal my family's house using fabricated legal complications. I could see Ember sitting straighter in her chair, probably calculating how soon she could redecorate the master bedroom. I see, I said quietly. And these irregularities, when do you expect them to be resolved? Pemberton waved his hand dismissively. These things can take years to sort out. Generational property transfers, trust modifications. It's quite complex. Really, it's better for everyone if we keep things simple. Out! Damon leaned forward, his voice taking on the patient tone he'd used to explain complex business deals to me over the years. Nadine, I know this isn't easy, but Pemberton knows what he's talking about. This way, you won't have to worry about property taxes, maintenance, all those headaches. The condo will be perfect for you. Much more manageable. Manageable? As if I were a child who needed to be protected from adult responsibilities. I looked around the table, taking in each face. Pemberton, smug and satisfied with his clever manipulation of legal language. Damon, trying to look sympathetic while barely containing his excitement at getting everything he wanted. Ember, her eyes bright with triumph as she imagined herself as mistress of my family home. And Wade, my sweet boy, looking uncomfortable but trusting that his parents were handling things fairly. Well, I said, closing the folder with a soft snap, I suppose you've thought of everything. Pemberton smiled, probably thinking he'd won. We've tried to be thorough, yes. Of course, you're welcome to have your own attorney review the documents, but I think you'll find everything is quite standard for a case like this. A case like this. A devoted wife of 42 years being discarded so her husband could play house with their son's wife. That won't be necessary, I said, reaching for the pen Pemberton offered. Where do I sign? The room went silent. Even Ember looked surprised by my immediate capitulation. Are you sure, Mom? Wade asked, his voice uncertain. Maybe you should take some time to think about it. I turned to my son, this good man who still believed in fairness and honesty because I'd raised him to, and smiled. Sweetheart, sometimes in life you have to know when to fight and when to accept reality. Your father and I have had a good run, but it's time for both of us to start new chapters. Damon was frowning now, clearly puzzled by my easy surrender. He'd expected a battle, had probably prepared arguments and justifications for why he deserved everything. My compliance was making him nervous. The signature goes here, Pemberton said, pointing to a line at the bottom of the final page. And here, and initial here. I signed my name with steady strokes, each letter precisely formed. Nadine Elizabeth Morrison. The same signature I'd used on our marriage certificate 42 years ago, back when I'd believed in forever. There, I said, setting down the pen and looking directly at Damon. I hope this gives you everything you're looking for. Something flickered in his eyes then. Guilt, maybe, or a belated recognition of what he was destroying. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by the selfish satisfaction of a man who thought he'd gotten away with betraying his wife. Ember could barely contain herself. She reached over and squeezed Wade's hand, her voice breathy with excitement. I'm so proud of how maturely you're both handling this. It takes real strength to put family first. Family first. The woman who was sleeping with her father-in-law was lecturing me about putting family first. Thank you, dear, I said warmly. That means so much coming from you. As we prepared to leave, Pemberton gathered the signed documents with obvious satisfaction. I'll file these with the court tomorrow. The divorce should be finalized within 60 days. 60 days until Damon was free to marry his son's wife. 60 days until Ember thought she'd be living in my family home. 60 days until they discovered that some games have rules the players don't even know exist. Outside the building, Wade hugged me tightly, his eyes wet with unshed tears. Mom, are you okay? You seem so calm about all this. I patted his cheek, this boy who looked so much like his father had at that age, back when Damon still had a soul. I'm fine, sweetheart. Everything is going to work out exactly as it should. Ember appeared beside us, her arms sliding around Wade's waist with practiced possessiveness. Your mother is incredibly strong, baby. She's going to be so much happier now. I'm sure I will be, I agreed, meeting her triumphant gaze with a serene smile. I'm sure we all will be. As they walked away, I could hear Ember's excited chatter about helping me pack, about finding me a nice retirement community where I could make friends my own age, about how much simpler life would be for everyone now. I stood there in the shadow of the high-rise, watching my husband and daughter-in-law celebrate their victory, and felt a deep, cold satisfaction settle in my chest. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd outsmarted the naive old woman who'd spent 42 years taking care of everyone else. They had no idea that in exactly 60 days, when their divorce became final and they tried to claim their prizes, they would discover that some property belongs not to husbands or wives, but to bloodlines that stretch back generations. I walked to my car with steady steps, already thinking about the phone call I needed to make to Patricia Chen. There were preparations to complete, documentation to gather, and a few more moves to make in this chess game they didn't even know they were losing. The real show was about to begin. 2 weeks after signing the divorce papers, I was tending to my rose garden when I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. Wade's car pulled into the driveway, but something was wrong. Instead of his usual cheerful wave, he sat behind the wheel for a long moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. When he finally emerged, I could see that my son was broken. His usually pristine appearance was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his hair uncombed. But it was his eyes that broke my heart. They held the hollow, devastated look of someone whose world had just collapsed. "Wade?" I set down my gardening shears and hurried toward him. "Sweetheart, what's wrong? What's—" He looked at me for a moment, his mouth opening and closing as if he couldn't find the words. Then his face crumpled, and he collapsed onto my front steps like a marionette whose strings had been cut. "She's been lying to me," he whispered, his voice raw with pain. "All this time she's been lying, and—" I sat down beside him, not trusting myself to speak. Part of me wanted to wrap my arms around him and tell him everything would be okay. Another part wanted to demand details, to finally have confirmation of what I'd known for weeks. Instead, I waited, letting him find his way to the truth at his own pace. "I found text messages," he continued, staring at his hands. "Hundreds of them, between Ember and Dad. They've been planning this whole thing for months." My heart ached for him, but I forced my voice to remain calm. "Planning what exactly?" Wade let out a bitter laugh that sounded nothing like my gentle son. "The divorce, the affair. They thought they were so clever, waiting until after you signed the papers to run off together. Ember was bragging to someone about how easy it was to manipulate both of you." The words hit me like physical blows, even though I'd known the truth for weeks. Hearing it from Wade's lips made it real in a way that all my observations and suspicions hadn't. "How did you find out?" I asked quietly. "Sage called me." Wade's voice was thick with gratitude and grief. "She said she couldn't watch this happen anymore. She told me where to look, what to search for." I thought she was crazy at first, but then I checked Ember's phone while she was in the shower and— He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. I could imagine what those messages contained. The excitement, the planning, the cruel laughter at the expense of the people they were betraying. "Sage has been trying to warn people for weeks," Wade continued. "She said she tried to talk to Ember, begged her to stop, but Ember just laughed, said she'd worked too hard to get close to our family's money to give up now. Money. Of course it all came back to money. Not love, not genuine connection, just cold calculation about assets and inheritance." "Where is Ember now?" I asked. "I confronted her this morning. Showed her the messages I'd found." Wade wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "She didn't even try to deny it. She just shrugged and said I was naive if I thought she'd ever actually loved me. Said Dad could give her things I never could." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. To dismiss years of marriage, to mock the love of a good man who'd done nothing but cherish her, it was beyond comprehension. "I threw her out," Wade said, his voice gaining strength. "Told her she had an hour to pack her things and get out of our house. She laughed at me, Mom. Said it didn't matter because soon she'd be living somewhere much nicer anyway." somewhere much nicer. My family home, which she believed would soon be hers. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," I said, finally allowing myself to touch his shoulder. "You didn't deserve any of this." Wade looked up at me then, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "How are you so calm about this? Dad betrayed you too." He threw away 42 years of marriage for her. I studied my son's face, this man I'd raised to believe in goodness and loyalty, and made a decision. He deserved to know that he wasn't alone in this, that someone else was fighting for what was right. "Wade, there's something I need to tell you about the divorce, about what really happened in that lawyer's office." Over the next hour, I told him everything. About Sage's warning, about my weeks of careful observation, about Patricia Chen and the trust provisions that Damon and Ember knew nothing about. Wade listened in stunned silence as I explained how I deliberately played the role of the naive, defeated wife while gathering evidence and preparing my real response. "You knew?" he whispered when I finished. "All this time, you knew what they were doing?" "I knew," I confirmed. "And I let them think they'd won, because sometimes the best strategy is to let your opponents reveal exactly who they are before you make your move." Wade stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. "Mom, I had no idea you were so strategic." I smiled sadly. 42 years of marriage teaches you a lot about people, sweetheart, including when to fight and when to wait for the right moment. So what happens now? When Dad finds out about the trust, that's up to him. And Ember. I stood up, brushing dirt from my gardening clothes. They made their choices. Now they get to live with the consequences. Wade stood too, looking more like himself than he had since arriving. "What about us? I mean, I know Ember is my wife, or was my wife, but I can't just pretend this didn't happen." "You don't have to pretend anything," I assured him. "You're the innocent party in all this. You have every right to protect yourself." As if summoned by our conversation, another car pulled into the driveway. This time it was Sage, her face anxious as she hurried toward us. "Wade, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I know this is all my fault." "If I hadn't told you to look—" "You saved me," Wade interrupted, his voice firm. "If you hadn't warned me, I would have spent months or years married to someone who was using me. You saved me from wasting my life on a lie." Sage's eyes filled with tears. "I should have said something sooner. I should have protected you better." I watched the two of them, noting the way Sage's genuine distress contrasted so sharply with Ember's calculated manipulation. Where Ember was all sharp edges and hidden agendas, Sage radiated warmth and sincerity. Even in her guilt and pain, she was thinking of Wade's welfare. "Sage," I said gently, "you did exactly the right thing. You chose loyalty and honesty over family convenience. That takes real courage." She looked at me with surprised gratitude. "I was so afraid you'd hate me for bringing this into your family." "My dear, you didn't bring anything into our family. You revealed what was already here, festering in the darkness. Now we can deal with it in the light." Wade moved closer to Sage, his hand hovering near her shoulder as if he wanted to comfort her, but wasn't sure if it was appropriate. "Sage, I need you to know how grateful I am. Not just for warning me, but for being honest when it would have been easier to stay silent." The look that passed between them was charged with something new and tentative. Not romance, not yet, but the recognition of shared values, of similar wounds, of the possibility that something good might grow from the ashes of this betrayal. "I should go," Sage said suddenly, as if realizing she was intruding on a family crisis. "You two need time to process all this." "Actually," Wade said quickly, "would you like to stay for dinner? Mom makes the best pot roast in the county, and I think we could all use some normal conversation right now." Sage looked to me for permission, and I nodded warmly. "I'd love to have you stay. It's been far too long since we've had honest conversation around our dinner table." As the three of us walked toward the house, I felt something shift in the air around us. The toxic cloud that had been hovering over our family was finally beginning to lift. Ember's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also revealed the true character of everyone involved. Wade was stronger than I'd given him credit for, capable of facing hard truths and making difficult decisions. Sage was proving herself to be everything her sister wasn't, loyal, honest, selfless. And I had rediscovered my own strength, my ability to plan and wait and fight for what mattered. That evening, as we sat around my kitchen table sharing stories and laughter, I watched Wade and Sage together. There was something healing in their connection, a recognition that they had both been betrayed by someone they loved, but that betrayal didn't have to define them. You know, Sage said quietly as we cleared the dishes, Ember always said I was too soft, too trusting. She said nice people finish last. Wade paused in his work, looking at her intently. I used to think being decent was enough, that if you treated people well and trusted them, they'd do the same for you. And now? I asked, curious about how this experience would change my son. Wade glanced at Sage, then back at me. Now I think being decent is still the right choice. But it doesn't mean you have to be naive. You can be kind and still protect yourself. You can trust people who prove they deserve it. As the evening wound down and Sage prepared to leave, Wade walked her to her car. Through the kitchen window, I watched them stand talking quietly in the driveway, their conversation intimate and earnest. When he finally returned to the house, there was something different about his expression. "She's remarkable," he said simply. "Yes, she is," I agreed. "Very different from her sister." Wade nodded thoughtfully. "I keep thinking about what you said earlier, about letting people reveal who they really are. Ember showed me exactly who she was, but I was too blind to see it. But Sage, she's been showing me who she is too, and I almost missed it because I was so focused on the wrong person. The heart heals, Wade, and when it does, it often sees more clearly than before." That night, as I prepared for bed in the house that would soon legally be mine again, I thought about the strange turns life takes. Ember's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also created opportunities for truth, for genuine connection, for new beginnings based on honesty rather than deception. In trying to destroy our family, Ember had actually revealed its strength. She'd stripped away the pretenses and false loyalties, leaving only what was real and worth preserving. Tomorrow, I would call Patricia Chen and begin the final phase of my plan. But tonight, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. The call came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 63 days after I'd signed those divorce papers in Pemberton's office. I was having coffee on my back porch, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, when my phone rang. Damon's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time in months, I felt genuine amusement as I answered. "Hello, Damon. What the hell have you done?" His voice was raw with panic and rage, all pretense of civility abandoned. I took a leisurely sip of my coffee before responding. "Good morning to you too. I'm fine, thank you for asking. The weather is lovely today." "Don't play games with me, Nadine. My lawyer called an hour ago. He says there's a problem with the house. Some bullshit about a trust that no one mentioned before." "Oh, that." I kept my voice light, conversational. "Yes, I imagine that came as quite a surprise." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. Then his voice came back, lower and more dangerous than before. You knew about this trust the whole time, didn't you?" "Of course I knew. It's my family's trust, Damon. My grandfather established it to protect our property from exactly this kind of situation." "This kind of situation?" His voice cracked with indignation. "We're getting divorced. That's normal, Nadine. People get divorced every day." I stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out over the garden that my grandmother had planted, that my mother had tended, that I had lovingly maintained for 40 years. "You're right. People do get divorced every day, but they usually don't commit adultery with their daughter-in-law while planning to steal their wife's family home." The sharp intake of breath told me he hadn't expected such direct confrontation. For weeks, I'd played the role of the confused, hurt wife. Now he was hearing from the woman who'd been planning his downfall while he celebrated his cleverness. "How long have you known?" he asked finally. "Long enough," I replied. "Long enough to document everything. Long enough to protect what matters. Long enough to watch you and Ember plan your little future together in my family's house." "Our house," he corrected automatically, but there was no conviction in his voice anymore. "No, Damon. Never our house. The deed has always been in trust. You were allowed to live here as my husband, but you never owned so much as a single brick. And now that you've chosen to end our marriage through adultery, you've forfeited any right to remain here. Another long silence. Then, in a voice that sounded like a man watching his world collapse, "Where am I supposed to go?" The pathetic quality of the question almost made me feel sorry for him. Almost. "I imagine you and Ember will figure something out. You're both so clever, after all. Nadine, please. Can't we work something out? I know I made mistakes, but—" "Mistakes?" I cut him off, my voice sharp for the first time. Mistakes are forgetting to pick up milk or missing an anniversary. What you did was a deliberate betrayal of everything we built together. What you did was seduce our son's wife and plan to steal my inheritance. Those aren't mistakes, Damon. That's who you chose to become." I heard a woman's voice in the background, shrill and demanding. Ember, no doubt wanting to know what was happening to her carefully laid plans. "I have to go," Damon said, his voice defeated. "But this isn't over." "Yes, it is," I replied calmly. "It's been over for quite some time. You just didn't realize it yet." After hanging up, I sat back down and finished my coffee in peaceful silence. The phone rang several more times. Damon's number, then an unknown number that was probably Ember. But I didn't answer. I had nothing more to say to either of them. An hour later, Wade's car pulled into the driveway. He looked grim but determined as he walked up the porch steps, Sage beside him holding a manila folder. "Mom, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "Of course. Come sit down." Wade took the chair across from me while Sage settled beside him, their proximity speaking to the growing bond between them. Over the past few weeks, they'd become inseparable, finding solace and understanding in their shared experience of betrayal. "Sage has been helping me go through Ember's things," Wade began. "We found some documents that I think you need to see." Sage opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers. "These were hidden in a lockbox in Ember's closet. I think they show just how long this has been planned." The first document was a copy of my grandfather's will, annotated in Ember's handwriting with notes about property values and inheritance laws. The second was a timeline, meticulously detailed, showing when she'd planned to seduce Damon, when they'd initiate divorce proceedings, and when they expected to take possession of the house. But it was the third document that made my blood run cold. It was a life insurance policy on me, taken out by Ember 6 months ago, enlisting herself as the beneficiary. "She forged your signature," Sage said quietly. "I checked with the insurance company. They have no record of you ever agreeing to this policy." Wade's face was pale with fury. "She wasn't just planning to steal from you, Mom. She was planning to—" He couldn't finish the sentence. I stared at the policy, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. The woman I'd welcomed into my family, whom I'd treated like a daughter, had been planning not just my financial ruin but potentially something far worse. "There's more," Sage continued, pulling out a printed email. "This is from a private investigator Ember hired to look into your family's assets. She's been researching the trust for months, trying to find loopholes." The investigator's report was thorough and chilling. It detailed not just the trust provisions, but my daily routines, my medical history, my relationships with neighbors and friends. Ember had been studying me like a predator studies prey. "Wade, I need you to take these documents to the police," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil in my chest. "The forged insurance policy alone is a felony." "Already done," he replied. "I called Detective Martinez this morning. He's opening an investigation into identity theft and insurance fraud." We sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the full scope of Ember's betrayal. She hadn't just been unfaithful, she'd been systematically planning to destroy our entire family. "There's something else," Sage said hesitantly. "Something I probably should have told you weeks ago." Wade took her hand encouragingly. "Go ahead. Ember isn't just manipulative and greedy. She's dangerous. This isn't the first time she's done something like this." Sage's voice was barely above a whisper. "Our Aunt Eleanor died 2 years ago. Sudden heart attack. Very unexpected. Ember was taking care of her at the time, helping with her medications. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud." Wade's grip on Sage's hand tightened. "The doctors said it could happen to anyone," Sage continued. "Eleanor had a heart condition, and sometimes these things just happen. But afterward, Ember inherited Eleanor's house and her savings, and she seemed so pleased about it. Not grief-stricken like you'd expect, but satisfied." "Did you tell the police about this?" I asked. Sage nodded. Detective Martinez is looking into Eleanor's death, too. He said they might be able to exhume the body if they find enough evidence to warrant an investigation. We were interrupted by the sound of a car pulling up the driveway with unnecessary aggression. Through the trees, I could see Damon's Mercedes, followed by a small moving truck. Ember emerged from the passenger seat like a fury, her perfect facade finally cracking to reveal the calculating predator beneath. "That's my cue to go inside," I said, standing. "Wade, would you and Sage mind handling this? I don't think I can look at either of them right now without saying something I might regret." From my living room window, I watched the confrontation unfold on my front lawn. Ember was screaming at Wade, her face twisted with rage as she pointed at the house. Damon stood beside the moving truck, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Two burly movers waited uncertainly, unsure whether to unload their cargo. Wade's voice carried through the glass, calm but implacable. "You're not welcome here, Ember. Neither of you are." "This is my house," Ember shrieked. "We signed papers, it's ours." "No," Sage said, stepping forward to stand beside Wade. "It never was, and it never will be." The look Ember gave her sister was pure venom. "You did this. You poisoned them against me. You're just jealous because I found a way out of our pathetic family, and you're still stuck being nobody." "I'd rather be nobody than be you," Sage replied quietly. Ember lunged forward as if to attack her sister, but Wade stepped between them, his presence enough to stop her advance. For a moment, the three of them formed a tableau. Wade and Sage united in their strength and integrity, Ember isolated in her rage and desperation. "Get off my property," Wade said, his voice carrying an authority I'd never heard from him before. "Both of you. You have 5 minutes to get in that truck and leave, or I'm calling the police." Damon finally spoke, his voice tired and broken. "Come on, Ember. It's over." But Ember wasn't ready to accept defeat. She spun toward the house, her eyes wild as she spotted me in the window. "This isn't over," she screamed. "You think you're so smart, but I know things about this family. I know secrets that could destroy all of you." I opened the window slightly, my voice carrying clearly across the yard. "The only secrets being destroyed today are yours, dear. Detective Martinez is very interested in your relationship with your Aunt Eleanor." The color drained from Ember's face so quickly I thought she might faint. Damon grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the truck with sudden urgency. "We're leaving," he called out. "We're leaving right now." As the moving truck pulled away, followed by Damon's Mercedes, I felt something release in my chest. The strangers who had invaded my home, who had planned to steal my legacy and possibly worse, were finally gone. Wade and Sage came inside, both looking emotionally drained but victorious. "It's over," Wade said, collapsing into my favorite armchair. "They're really gone." "The house part is over," I corrected gently, "but Ember still needs to face consequences for what she's done. The forgery, the fraud, possibly Eleanor's death. Justice moves slowly, but it moves." Sage curled up on the couch, looking younger and more vulnerable than her 30 years. "I keep thinking I should feel sorry for her. She's my sister after all, but I can't. She chose this path, step by step, decision by decision." "You don't owe her your sympathy," I assured her. "She made her choices. Now she gets to live with them." As evening fell, the three of us prepared dinner together in my kitchen. It felt like a celebration, though none of us said so explicitly. We were celebrating survival, integrity, and the bonds that truly matter. Looking at Wade and Sage working side by side, I could see something beautiful growing between them. Not the desperate, grasping love that Ember had offered, but something real and lasting, built on mutual respect and shared values. "You know," I said as we sat down to eat, "this house has seen a lot of history. My grandmother raised 5 children here. My mother survived the Depression within these walls. I raised Wade here, and someday, I hope his children will play in that same backyard." Wade and Sage exchanged a look that spoke volumes about their future together. "But tonight," I continued, raising my glass of wine, "we celebrate the fact that this house will remain in the hands of people who understand what family really means." As we toasted to new beginnings, I felt the deep satisfaction of a battle well fought and won. Ember and Damon had tried to destroy everything I held dear, but in the end, they'd only succeeded in revealing what was truly precious. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen preparing Thanksgiving dinner, the same kitchen where I'd entertained Ember's false sympathy and endured her calculated manipulations. But today, the space felt entirely different, warm, honest, filled with genuine laughter and love. Wade was at the stove, carefully basting the turkey with the same concentration he'd shown as a child learning to tie his shoes. Sage sat at the kitchen island, her engagement ring catching the afternoon light as she chopped vegetables for stuffing. They'd announced their engagement a month ago, and seeing them together still filled me with quiet joy. "Mom, the timer for the sweet potatoes is going off," Wade called out, his sleeves rolled up and an apron protecting his shirt. "I've got it," Sage said, sliding off her stool with practiced ease. Over the past months, she'd become an integral part of our household rhythm, helping with cooking, gardening, and the 1,000 small tasks that make a house a home. The front doorbell chimed, and I went to answer it, expecting our neighbors, the Hendersons, whom I'd invited to join us for dinner. Instead, I found Detective Martinez standing on my porch, his expression serious but not grim. "Mrs. Morrison, I hope I'm not interrupting your holiday." "Not at all, Detective. Please come in. Can I offer you some coffee? We have plenty of food if you'd like to stay for dinner." He followed me into the living room, declining my offer of refreshment. "I wanted to update you on the investigation before the holiday weekend." Wade and Sage appeared in the doorway, their faces tense with anticipation. "Ember Holbrook has been formally charged with insurance fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud," Martinez began. "The district attorney feels confident about securing convictions on all counts." "And Eleanor?" Sage asked quietly. Martinez's expression grew more serious. "The exhumation revealed traces of digitalis in your aunt's system. Levels that would be consistent with intentional poisoning, not accidental overdose from her heart medication." Sage's hand flew to her mouth. "She really killed her." "We're building a case for first-degree murder. Ember's fingerprints were found on the medicine bottles, and we discovered she'd been researching the effects of digitalis online for weeks before Eleanor's death. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November air. What about Damon? No evidence of his involvement in Eleanor's death. But he's been charged as an accessory to the fraud schemes. His cooperation with the investigation will likely result in a reduced sentence." After Martinez left, we sat in the living room, absorbing the news. Justice was finally being served, but it felt hollow somehow. Eleanor was still dead, Wade's marriage was still destroyed, and 42 years of my life had still been built on a foundation that crumbled the moment my husband chose betrayal over loyalty. "Are you okay, Mom?" Wade asked, noting my silence. I considered the question carefully. "I'm relieved," I said finally. "Relieved that Ember can't hurt anyone else. Relieved that Eleanor will get justice. But mostly, I'm relieved that we survived this with our integrity intact." Sage reached over and squeezed my hand. "I keep thinking about all the what-ifs. What if I hadn't told you about the affair? What if you hadn't known about the trust? What if Ember had succeeded?" "But she didn't," Wade pointed out. "And we're all stronger now because of it." He was right. The past 6 months had tested us in ways I'd never imagined, but we'd emerged more connected, more honest with each other, more aware of what truly mattered. The Hendersons arrived shortly after, followed by Patricia Chen and her husband, whom I'd invited after discovering we shared a love of gardening. The dining room filled with conversation and laughter, the kind of genuine warmth that can't be manufactured or manipulated. As we sat down to dinner, I looked around the table at the faces gathered there. Real friends, chosen family, people who cared about each other without agenda or calculation. This was what Ember had never understood. That true wealth isn't measured in property values or bank accounts, but in the quality of the relationships you build. "Before we eat," I said, standing and raising my wine glass, "I want to say something." The conversation quieted, all eyes turning to me. This year has been one of the most difficult of my life. I lost a marriage I thought would last forever. I discovered that someone I loved was capable of unimaginable betrayal. I learned that my family was under attack from within. I paused, meeting each pair of eyes around the table. But I also learned that I'm stronger than I ever imagined. I learned that my son is a man of integrity who chooses love over revenge. I learned that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as losses. I looked directly at Sage. This woman who'd had the courage to speak truth when silence would have been easier. I learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about people who stand by you when the world tries to tear you down. People who choose honesty over convenience, loyalty over self-interest. Wade stood and raised his own glass. To Mom, who taught us that grace under pressure isn't just a saying, it's a way of life. To Nadine, Patricia added, who proved that patience and planning can overcome any adversary. To new beginnings, Sage said softly, and to families we choose as much as families we're born into. As we clinked glasses, I felt a deep sense of completion. Not because the story was over. Wade and Sage would marry in the spring. There would be grandchildren eventually. Life would continue with all its joys and challenges. But because I finally understood who I was beyond being Damon's wife or Wade's mother, I was Nadine Morrison, keeper of my family's legacy, protector of what mattered, survivor of betrayal, and architect of my own future. After dinner, as our guests prepared to leave, Patricia pulled me aside. "Have you given any thought to what you'll do with the downtown condo?" she asked. "The one from the divorce settlement?" I smiled. "I'm thinking of turning it into a refuge for women who are rebuilding their lives after divorce. Nothing grand or institutional, just a quiet place where someone can stay while they figure out their next chapter." Patricia nodded approvingly. "Ember probably thought she was taking something valuable from you with that settlement. She had no idea she was giving you away to help other women in similar situations. Ironic, isn't it? Her greed became the foundation for something genuinely useful." Later that evening, after Wade and Sage had gone home to their apartment, I walked through the quiet house, turning off lights and checking locks. The same ritual I'd performed for 40 years, but now it felt different, peaceful rather than routine, secure rather than automatic. In my bedroom, I opened the jewelry box where I kept my most precious possessions, past the pearl necklace my mother had given me, past the gold bracelet from my grandmother. I found what I was looking for, my original wedding ring, the simple gold band Damon had placed on my finger when we were both young and full of dreams. I held it up to the lamplight, studying the inscription inside. Forever and always D. Forever had lasted 42 years. Always had ended the day he chose another woman over his family. But that didn't erase the good years, the love that had been real, even if it hadn't been permanent. I placed the ring back in the box, not with anger or sadness, but with acceptance. That chapter of my life was closed, but the story continued. My phone buzzed with a text message from Wade. "Thank you for an amazing Thanksgiving, Mom. Sage and I are so grateful to have you in our lives." I typed back, "Thank you for becoming the man I always knew you could be. Sleep well." A second message appeared. This one from Sage. "I never had a mother who believed in me the way you do. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like." I wiped away the tears that sprang to my eyes. At 64, I was discovering that some of life's greatest gifts come in the second act, when you finally understand what you're worth and refuse to accept anything less. The house settled around me with familiar creaks and sighs, the sounds of a structure that had weathered many storms and would weather many more. I thought about my grandmother, who'd raised 5 children in this house during the Depression. I thought about my mother, who'd maintained it as a sanctuary during World War II when my father was overseas. I was part of a long line of strong women who'd protected what mattered, who'd faced adversity with grace and determination. Ember had tried to break that chain, but she'd only succeeded in forging it stronger. Tomorrow, I would start planning the refuge for divorced women, using the condo that was supposed to be my consolation prize. Next month, I would help Wade and Sage plan their wedding, which would take place in the garden where my grandmother had married my grandfather 80 years ago. But tonight, I would simply be grateful for survival, for discovery, for the knowledge that at any age, at any stage of life, it's never too late to discover who you really are when everything false is stripped away. Outside my window, the November wind rustled through the bare branches of the oak tree Damon and I had planted on our 10th anniversary. It had weathered storms, droughts, and countless seasons of change. Like me, it had bent but not broken, had endured and grown stronger. In the spring, it would bloom again, and so would I. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.